Let's talk about project management. Project management is a very important aspect in the cable industry. Without project management, the execution of a large project or even a small scale project would not be as successful as it could be without the aid of a project manager and project management skills. What we're going to take a look at here is several facets associated with project management. First, a history, looking at where project management came from, what is the background, the legacy, what caused project management to become a discipline as finely honed as it is today. The skills portion, we're going to take a look at what a project manager's skills need to look like. Generally, project managers are very meticulous, in some cases very A-type personality type people. Their skills, some innate, some learned, but they are all skills that are finely honed. Next, we'll take a look at the steps involved in project management. Each one is a methodic set of rules and steps that some of them making very good sense, some of them requiring some background and some training. And then finally, you couldn't be a good project manager without having a set of tools, just like you can't be a good mechanic or a good electronics tech unless you have a good set of highly honed, highly skilled tools and having the skills and the techniques to operate the tools. So the history of project management. Project management really got its start in the defense industry and in the construction industries. Typically, project management on the scale was looked at as being a very large scale type project. Although project management skills are used even down to smaller scale projects, it certainly is needed in very large and complex type projects that you would find in building large weapon systems or in building the typical construction type projects like we've seen here in Las Vegas in the resort corridor. It was really based on a need to manage and control large projects with multiple work teams. You have to bring in teams of people with all types of skills, and so it takes a very skilled person or a team of people to manage folks with different types of backgrounds, different types of skill sets in order to get the project through to completion successfully. In the IT industry, project management has become a very, very valuable tool. There are very few software, hardware, network rollouts that aren't completed without the use of the tools and skills of a good project manager and project management team. Without the project management in the IT realm, it can become disastrous very quickly in terms of the rollout and successful completion of the project. The common tools and techniques that are used for project management, a lot of these you can find in a typical Microsoft project piece of software. You can find them individually as packages, but in Microsoft Project you will find the Program Evaluation and Review Technique, or the PERT, the Critical Path Method, or CPM, and then finally looking at earned value cost tracking and earned value management, which helps senior level managers determine whether or not a project is on track or if there are some looming problems and disasters. So these tools and techniques allow the project manager to move through the project and determine when things are going right and things are going wrong. The traits of a good project manager. First off, a good project manager has to have strong organizational skills. They have to be able to determine when a project is on task, on time, under budget, going to be delivered properly, and using those organizational skills, they're able to manage the project, manage the resources, manage the money associated with the project. They have to know when they need to step in and assume authority. This is where typically your type A type personality comes in. It requires a person with very good instinct and oversight to determine, when they need to become robust, when they need to become the authoritarian type, to try to get the project out of trouble if there is, in fact, some stumbling going on in the project. They have to have an ability to focus on key issues so that they know when things are important, how to prioritize things within the project. Good customer skills, good customer service skills. The project manager has to know how to deal skillfully with people at different levels, and certainly the customer. The last thing that you want to go wrong in a project is to have the customer become dissatisfied and possibly pull the plug on the project. Project manager has to be flexible, knowing when to reroute things, when to reschedule things, and when to look at the personnel issues that might arise. Have to have good sales skills. Generally, a good project manager, like a good account manager, is always looking for that next job. And with the sales skills, they're able to not only sell themselves, but the team's abilities. And then finally, the people skills. Because the project manager has to deal with people at all levels, inside and outside of the project, they have to be able to handle themselves with tact, diplomacy, and be able to determine when to step up and straighten out a situation if there are personnel issues. Very simply, the project management can be broken down into these 3 steps. And it primarily has to do with building the plan, tracking and managing, and finally closing the project. Each of these 3 steps is very, very encompassing. In building the plan, there has to be a large amount of time spent determining what the path of execution is going to be for the project. Once the plan is put in place, all the contingencies have been looked at, all of the options, then it's a matter of putting the project into execution mode and tracking and managing. Tracking and managing the progress, tracking and managing the people, tracking and managing the budget. As the project then starts to move to the end, then there are those things that have to occur to start closing out a project for the final sign-off and delivery to the customer. Unfortunately, many projects start without a plan. In doing so, that is very, very disastrous. Without a plan, there's no way to control the project. Good project managers know what kinds of things can occur based on lessons learned, and know what the contingencies are if they have to move to plan B, plan C, whatever it takes to make the project execute to the final closing part. Project manager's goal then starts with then developing a team of individuals involved in the project. So what he starts doing is looking at the types of skills that he's going to need, he or she is going to need to execute the project, and determining at what levels and what skill levels those people that will be brought in will be able to operate. It requires both leadership and planning. And if you've ever been around a good project management, it's very evident that leadership is a key attribute to a project manager. Even a small project can have a simple plan. With a small project, it's very possible that you can do a cut and paste. You could copy it over from a previous plan. Of course, with a more complex project, it's going to require a detailed plan and certainly require a greater group effort by the team. And so it requires further breakdown between the teams and the members of the teams for the project manager to look at those key characteristics of the people and determine who's going to play what role. Out in the industry, fortunately, just like Bixby, there is a group out there whose sole function is training and identifying the key aspects to the project manager. The project management knowledge areas are developed based upon best practices and lessons learned in the industry. Bixby itself has a program for project management, and generally it's geared around cable management and cable installations on the residential and commercial level. For project management overall, the Project Management Institute, PMI, is the governing body and the certification body for project management as a whole. If you are interested in becoming a project manager, the Project Management Institute has a path based upon a body of knowledge where a person can learn, test, and be certified as a project management professional. So what are the knowledge areas then that fall into that project management body of knowledge? Well, as you can see here, there is many types of management that a project manager has to be concerned with. Human resources management, scope management, integration management, time management, cost management, quality management, communications, risk, and procurement management. Each of them is a different flavor and type of management that has to be executed, but the project manager is responsible for each of these areas. In the human resources management area, the first thing is that a project manager has to be good at dealing with personnel issues and recognizing when personnel issues are becoming a problem and when they are going right. The manager has to pick the right people to do the job. Well, this is based upon the skill sets that are required for any particular type of project or installation. Of course, in the cable management scheme and in the network management scheme, we're looking at people that have the right certifications and the right skill sets to do those types of jobs. They've got to be properly trained, equipped, and motivated to operate in any given field of expertise. Of course, in any project, especially ones that involve types of construction or areas where safety becomes an issue, it becomes the greatest liability for the project. So safety on the project is paramount, and it's one of the largest areas of oversight that a project manager has to deal with and be aware of. Scope management, being able to develop the scope statement or the statement of work. The problem that occurs with scope management is that most projects, and most very large projects, begin to suffer from something called scope creep. So what has to be done very early, and preferably in writing, is come up with an agreement between the customer and the company to make sure that you have properly fenced in what the scope and management of a project has to be. It has to include, and it can include and go beyond the detailed specifications. Where this comes into play is typically where you're looking at, again, follow-on jobs. What are those things that a project manager can do in terms of goodwill that buys them the next project that they might be involved with by the same customer? So scope management puts a fence around the project and tries to harness those things that might lead to scope creep, but also allows the flexibility for adding things if they are justified and within the scope of the project. It's very important to include a list of assumptions, those terms and conditions. Without those lists of assumptions, you may not know when you've crossed the boundaries. And so with the list of assumptions, you've got an idea of what you think the project should be, what the customer thinks the project should be, and what the limits should be. Integration management really comes back to the beginning of the project, the planning, where the manager has broken the project up into smaller bite-sized pieces. It kind of comes down to the old adage of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It looks pretty big, but once you take it in small pieces, it's more manageable. So what a project manager then ends up doing is running several small projects as one large project. And he does that by using teams or sub-teams then that he's able to integrate together. And they're typically done by discipline. You may have electrical contractors, you may have the folks on the phone side and the network side all working together as sub-teams, but be part of a larger scale on the integration. Time management, this is one of the things that where a project manager has to use the tools available to make sure that everything is happening when it's supposed to. The project manager is looking at the overall schedules, day by day, week by week, month by month, to make sure that things are being executed in the order that they have to, and materials and skills are being provided at the proper time. This is where the calculation of the critical path can come into play. Using CPM and using the software like project management can help to be able to manage the time and know when problems start to occur. So it requires maintaining a current schedule and finally being able to communicate with the team. You'll see as we go along that there are things that become reiterated throughout the process, and communication, a very big effort, has to be maintained throughout the project. Cost management, developing the cost estimate and the project budget. And this is that area where once you determine the cost and the estimate, then you look at the execution and making sure that everything is happening when it's supposed to and within the dollar figures that were defined. So the project manager becomes very involved in tracking the costs and making sure that you're not overspending, and if you are, that you let somebody know early on so that any other adjustments can be made in the budget. Then it becomes a problem then, or a process of changing the activities or allowing for different substitutions to occur so that the project stays on task. Quality management, developing a quality management plan lays out the framework for knowing when things are looking good or things are not looking so good. Quality is one of those things that all of us have a different perception of what a quality product looks like. It can be in the physical workmanship. It can be in terms of testing, if there are items that need to be tested to determine if they meet the quality standards. And it can be in terms of what the customer values. If he sees things that are represented as being done on time, whether or not he thinks the team looks good, the appearance of installers, and whether there's a nature of cooperativeness and the ease of doing business, all factor into a quality management scheme and an interpretation or a perception of good quality. Communications management. With the communications management plan, it requires planning. Again, it doesn't just happen. There are things that have to be done deliberately to make sure that communications happen at all levels, and it's got to go up and down the chain. How can we do this? Well, in a lot of cases, it's just as simply as scheduling meetings, having a standard meeting for a set of people so that the process and progress can be discussed and determine when problems start to occur. So this requires a huge rapport among the team members, the customers as well, to make sure that communications are free and are not being stifled. The good thing about today with technology, there's a lot of communication that can occur through emails. The nice thing about that is with emails, you've got a permanent record. If something comes up, you send it out in an email. It's got a date stamp on it. It's got the sender and the receiver. So there's no question about the recording of an event. Establishing a war room. It can be in the construction trailer. It can be in the customer's area. It just depends on what is most convenient for the specific topic being discussed. And then posting a schedule. This can be done by setting up a whiteboard in the area, setting up chalkboards, setting up cork boards, or even becoming more sophisticated and setting up a SharePoint delivery system where information can be loaded onto the network, onto a server, and anybody can get to the information and the materials that has the right access. Risk management. The risk management process is a matter of taking a look at those things that can cause problems during the execution of the project. This really folds back into safety issues. If we're looking at risks in terms of bodily injury or damage to materials, we can look at risk in terms of damage to reputation. It can ruin people and their businesses. Scheduling, if there are schedule risks in terms of when things need to be in place and when things need to be executed, we can identify that as a risk. And then things that are associated with the cost as well. So when we're looking at risk, we also have to look at what the impact is for a particular problem that might occur. So what has to happen very early, again, is looking at and building a risk assessment. And that's generally done prior to the bid. So the project manager is trying to figure out where things might go wrong, and if something goes wrong, what is it going to cost? What is going to be the impact? Is it going to be loss of life? Is it going to be damage to the project? Or is it going to be a damaging to the reputation of the players involved? So a risk plan has to be developed. The more this is thought out, the better the chances are of recovering from a problem that might occur during the execution of the project. Procurement management, both inside and outside the team, looks at managing when things are going to be in place for the project. You're looking at materials as well as people, subcontractors with specific skills being available and in place at the proper time. During the early phases of a construction project, where you're mostly looking at framers and structural people, there's no need for cable installers and network people to be in place. So you certainly wouldn't want to be paying for these people to be sitting around. So you have them arrive at the proper time during the construction or the progress. Looking at bulk purchases can involve carrying and storage costs. If you are looking at many large items that require warehousing, that can have you incur additional costs. If you can do something like just-in-time procurements where a vendor can provide their product at the right time, at the right place, so that you're at the point of the installation where you can install it rather than store it, this is going to save money on the overall scope of the project. So in developing a project plan, the simple method for developing the plan is to answer some questions. How does this become formulated? Again, it comes down to lessons learned, the experience from the team. So what can we do in each of these areas? Well, we develop a set of lessons and look at first what went right or what went wrong from the previous projects that the project manager and the team had been involved with. This becomes a lessons learned tool. In large organizations, there are actually software packages that are developed that do nothing but lessons learned, and the team has access to this information so that they can look at the database and determine, have we seen this before? What was the impact for a problem that might have occurred? What needs to be done? Generally, then, you have to go back and look at the scope of work to answer that question. You need to determine, again, that fenced-in process where you're trying to limit the activities to within what the customer has paid for. Developing a safety plan involves looking at and asking the question, how will accidents be prevented? In many cases, there is a plan to buy insurance to cover casualties and problems that have occurred. Who should develop the project plan? Well, you need to look at the organizational breakdown structure, the OBS. The organizational breakdown structure identifies all of the key players inside and outside of the organization, as well as those supporting members that are part of the project. Who does what? Well, there's another structure. Just like the organizational breakdown structure, we have a structure called the work breakdown structure that actually looks at each task and responsibility and responsible party to make sure that the tasks are done in an orderly and accountable fashion. When is each job performed? The timing and the execution then can be monitored and regulated by using those tools that we mentioned early on. PERT, CPM, milestone charts, Gantt charts, and even very simple calendar charts can be used to track and determine whether or not we are at the proper point and the spending and budgeting for a project as well as the deliverables. Determining what's the budget, we use a tool called earned value cost tracking or earned value management. And this is a set of formulary that helps upper management, senior executives, determine whether or not, based upon the estimates, the budgets, and the actual spendings that occurs, where the project is and what the status is, both time-wise and budget-wise. Who will do the quality checking? Again, a plan has to be developed that determines what is quality. There has to be a look at what the perception of quality is, and then start laying out what the quality plan should look like. If it requires material to be tested at different levels, that should go into the quality plan. If it determines what the look and feel has to be for particular materials, that needs to go in the plan. If it determines what the workers are supposed to look like and what their skills are, all of that should go into the quality plan so that you're not guessing. If anybody has a question, you pull out the quality plan and say, here's what quality is to this project. On the communications side of the house, the communications plan has to get down to looking at and maintaining the communications between all players. And this means identifying the means and the methods of communicating and who every player is on the team that needs to be communicated with at any given time during the project. So for the lessons learned, each project end should be a meeting where all the key players get together and review those things that were right and went wrong in a project and make sure that everything was captured. You're going to look at those things that went well, those things that did not go so well, and can be improved. The important thing is it cannot turn into a finger pointing or a blame game. It has to be constructive and it has to be positive in order for it to be of any value. And a corrective action program then has to be put in place. And what this will entail then is, if something went wrong, what was the methodology then to correct the action? Who was responsible for correcting the action? And what did it take to right the wrong? And then looking at continuous quality improvement. There's always room for improvement in terms of quality. And it's very easy for things to become lax. So it requires sometimes quality control and quality assurance specialists to keep an eye on those quality issues. In developing the scope of work, you can start very simply with the request for quote or request for proposal, if it's available. This comes down to looking at the customer's specifications. Where did the specifications come from? It came from the original requirements document. And then looking at a needs analysis, trying to determine from the requirements, the quote, and the specifications what is needed then to make this project successful. Coming up with a system then that makes it easier to approve change requests. For large projects, this is a constant process. Things happen and changes need to be made, and sometimes they need to be made very quickly and expeditiously to keep the project on track. At the end of a project's completion then, it becomes easier then to satisfy the customer if things are tracked and go well, and in the end you get paid in a timely fashion. A good statement of work then contains what the customer's needs are, black and white, no questions, it's written down, it's on paper. What the objectives, the project size, schedule, and all of the assumptions that you made in the execution of the project. In developing the safety plan, the project manager is ultimately the chief safety officer. In that light, the project manager assumes ultimate responsibility. It's the largest portion of personal liability that the project manager is responsible for. And it can be involving both litigation for death or injury and any criminal liability. It sends a good message to the customer if they know that you are always looking out for what's going on in terms of the safety issues that go on in a project. The safety plan and an active safety program is essential, and it has to be executed at all levels. So it seems like it's a lot of work, but the more, again, that's done up front in identifying safety issues can save problems and heartache later on if a problem occurs. It's a good idea as a project manager to rotate the responsibility of a safety coordinator among members of his team so that you have a fresh eye looking at those things that are safety issues during the execution of the project. The coordinator then is always reviewing the current safety plan and applying the safety guidelines that were originally laid out, conducting routine and periodic safety meetings. If you've ever been in an environment where safety issues were a constant, somebody was always reminding you of the safety practices that needed to be forefront in your thinking on a day-by-day basis. Contact the customer safety coordinator. In working closely with the customer safety coordinator, it builds a rapport and a standard of high safety and quality in the project. Looking at the site requirements and precautions, those things where working from heights, working from ladders, working in manholes, working around charged equipment, all become issues and things that have to have precautions in place. Having a site-specific emergency action plan. What if something goes wrong? Does everybody know where they're supposed to go? Everybody know where they're supposed to rally to, so that in the end there is accountability and you know when all members are available and accounted for. And having contact numbers in place, knowing the numbers for the police department, the fire department, the EMT, OSHA, anybody that you need to contact, and you don't have time to be looking up numbers. You have them all in place in the safety plan as well as the communications plan. And subcontractors then must always be required to develop a safety plan. They can dovetail and mimic your safety plan, but there has to be an accountability and a safety plan for all subcontractors as well. In looking at a safety plan, many issues need to be looked at and making sure that everything has been taken into considerations. As you look at this list, you can see numerous items that make sense to you as common sense. Training, motor vehicle safety, ladder safety, electrical safety. At the bottom of the list here, making sure that everybody has the proper protective equipment, eyeglasses, hearing protection, hard hats, shoes, gloves. All of those things that are going to ensure that you are looking at those safety hazards and trying to mitigate them with the proper clothing and equipment. In developing the organizational breakdown structure, you look at the complete statement of work. And so you're looking at those people that are needed to execute the job and identifying any other organizations that are going to augment the process. And then building an organizational chart so that you know who the key players are and where they fit into the scheme and into the hierarchy. It shows who's responsible for other team members, and that it may not necessarily conform to a ranking or a pay grade type hierarchy, but it lets everyone know what their role is. The organizational chart by person and by organization should then include phone numbers, email address, and any other information so that it can be looked at and determined very quickly who's who and how to get a hold of them. And you can see in this example then, you've got the project leader at the top, and then everything below that project leader shows an order of who's responsible to who works with who, and what the general makeup is for those teams and those skills. Unlike the organizational breakdown structure, the work breakdown structure deals with the tasks and the responsibilities based upon the skills and the disciplines involved. The work breakdown structure must be a sound, usable, and consistent structure. And we'll take a look at what the WBS actually looks like in several different formats. It must cover the elements of the project's end product or deliverable, looking at the starting, the planning point of the project, conducting and implementing the project, and then completing and closeout. It has to be as specific as possible and can be diagrammed as a tree structure, an outline structure, or something that looks more narrative. The work breakdown structure starts at a topmost level with a single entry, and it tends to have a parent-child relationship. Each parent may have multiple children. Each child, though, only has one parent. In the words that you use in a WBS, it must contain non-verbs, i.e. it must be nouns and adjectives. So it's not an action worded document. You place the lowest level then at each branch. It must end at or represent a unit or a package effort. Again, we'll see an example of what this looks like here in a moment. Each section then has to be uniquely scheduled, easily understood by all team members, defined enough to be assigned to an individual or team for performance or execution. And then at this point, we're looking at containing those action verbs. So at the highest level, non-verbs. At the lowest level is where we have the activity occurring in the WBS. Be aware that the WBS is not an account coding process. You do not use your typical accounting codes in a WBS process. Okay, it's not an organizational chart or an org structure. It is not a chronology or a time scheduled type breakdown. It's supposed to contain elements of the cost or the schedule that's readily or easily standardized. You can come up with a type of template to help you build the WBS, but getting into the practice of using wholesale cutting and pasting can get you into a problem area very quickly. And as with any type of plan, if you do a lot of cutting and pasting, there can be a higher error rate, and it requires a lot of editing and careful looking at before a plan gets sent off for somebody else to review. The elements then relating to the execution steps or the content then are often individually influenced by the client, the product, and the market conditions, looking at cradle to grave. This will make more sense when you see the WBS itself. So here's one look at how a WBS can be structured. And you will notice that there are 21 numbered tasks here. Each one at the highest level has a responsible activity or a responsible manager associated and named. Below each of them, you have the activity. So 1.0 is the school project manager in this case. 1.1 then becomes the activity of developing the scope. 1.2, resolving any assumptions. 1.3, developing the budget. 1.4, arranging access. And 1.5, kickoff meeting. So you can see at the highest level, noun or adjective. At the lower levels, then we've got the activity or the verbs occurring. And you can see when we move then to the next level, 2.0, now we're looking at that of a project manager, you, and each of your activities. 3, then, we start over again, and we're looking at the engineering manager and what the engineering manager's activities are. Another type of structure, more of an outline structure, you can see the same types of noun, adverb, or adjective descriptor at the top level, 1.0, and then the verb or activity levels below. In looking at developing a schedule, then we start looking at those things that are tool related. What can we use as a project manager to help us put a visual on what the project looks like? So the first one here, the Program Evaluation Review Technique, or the PERT, was originally devised and designed by the Navy during a missile program, the Polaris Missile Development Program. And in looking at this, we can see a blocked or a network diagram scheme here, predecessor-successor relationships with a flow that occurs between each of the major functions or activities from start to finish. The CPM method is a lot like the PERT method. This was developed by DuPont, but it identifies the chain of events that can take the longest to complete. The end date is determined then and identified by the critical path. So if a problem occurs within the critical path, then that is going to have a direct effect on the end date. Looking at milestone charts, this gives us a start to finish and more of a calendar function for determining when tasks begin, when tasks end, and where we're at in the process. You can see the blue filled in diamond indicates the start and the completion dates. The hollow or non-filled diamond indicates that a task has been started or completed. So you can see all of these tools used together help the project manager determine what exactly is going on with his project. Another representation, the Gantt chart, developed by Henry Gantt, shows the duration of the activity using a bar. It's kind of like a gas gauge or a fill gauge type representation. It does not show the predecessor and successor relationships, but it gives you an idea in terms of the planned duration and the percent of the task that it's completed. Once the task is completely filled in the case of the first one there, cable placement, the bar is completely filled. We know that it has been completed from beginning to end. The last one that you can use can be something as simple as a calendar that you would find like in Outlook. And you lay out the bars, and the tasks are generally stacked as space permits, and you start identifying when the activities are supposed to occur, and then the bar becomes your method of tracking where you're at in the relationship. So we've taken a look at the project manager's responsibility and all of the management plans that they are responsible for under the project manager's body of knowledge. And so hopefully you've seen that a project manager wears many, many hats and is required to have a very diverse skill set in order to become certified as a project manager under PMI and the PMP certification process. So for the next part, we'll expand upon the requirements for a project manager by going beyond that of the body of knowledge.